if you look at the middle three speeches, you've got these three guys, and this came up last class. You know, these are kind of the intellectual heavyweights of Athens. I forget exactly who asked the question, but are these, you know, sort of the intelligentsia. And they're part of not just the professional class, they're also part of the, you might call them, entertainment industry. But this had a bigger role in ancient Greece, poetry, dramatic production, than it does for us, where I think in a lot of cases, unless we get angry about, you know, what we saw in a movie or a TV show and we write a letter to the editor, we think of it as something that we consume and just sort of enjoy. For the Greeks, each one of these guys is tied in with something particularly important. And what's more, each one of them, by virtue of the kind of work that they're doing, has a claim to being wise, to being somebody who can tell you how you ought to live your life about important issues. Now, you know, you might say, I only go to my doctor when I feel sick. You know, what does the doctor have to tell me about things? Well, as you get older, they start telling you things like, look, you know, if you want to live longer, you're going to have to change your diet, start exercising more, quit smoking. What else do doctors typically tell? Quit drinking, drink less. Those are usually the big ones. You know, quit eating fatty foods, quit eating salty stuff, quit eating sweet foods. Notice, fatty, salty, sweet, those are the things we like to eat the most, right? So that's sort of like doctors are always saying, no more fun for you. But why are they actually doing that? Because health is a good. And health is part of the good life. As a matter of fact, health is part of the long life. So if you want to be able to enjoy it, you know, your doctor is probably giving you fairly good advice. And medicine has advanced, you know, quite a bit past the time of thinking in terms of bodily humors and remedies that they could come up with. But they actually had quite a few good ideas back in that time. And Eryximachus is sort of a typical representative of the medical profession at the time. The medical art is one of the oldest arts or sciences around. It goes, you know, back to the beginnings. You know, philosophy spun off a lot of other disciplines, many of the other things that you're studying, like psychology or sociology, the natural sciences. All those were, you know, originally part of philosophy. Natural sciences were called natural philosophy, and they got spun off. Medicine was around before that. Mathematics was also around. Another M1 too, music. So those are all well-established arts. What about these two guys, Aristophanes and Agathon? One is a comic playwright, and one is a tragic playwright. It means they write comedies and tragedies. And you guys have all seen like those, you know, those masks. You have one smiling and one crying. That's supposed to represent comedy and tragedy, right? Because comedy is about what?
Laughing.
Laughing and fun stuff and, you know, situations people get into that are funny or things like that. And tragedy is about what? Being sad, yeah, sooner or later. I mean, a lot of other things happen on the way. But, you know, when when Oedipus finds out that indeed it was his father that he killed and his mother who he married and by whom he sired a whole brood of children, he's more than sad. Yeah, but he actually gouges his eyes out. His mom hangs herself. And the rest of the kids are all screwed up. But, you know, sad is sort of a good description for that. Tragedies are about noble characters who find themselves, really, through no fault of their own, circumstances coming together with, you know, what seem to be random events but are often fate, and then some problem that they've got, something they're unable to make sense out of, things collapse. Shakespeare wrote comedies and tragedies. We nowadays often call tragedies dramas or thrillers. Comedies we still call comedies. And we've got a lot of different kinds of comedies, right? If you go on to Netflix, you guys all use Netflix or Hulu or something like that. You click on comedy, you have a whole drop-down menu, sketch comedy, screwball comedy, romantic comedy. What are other genres? There's like 15 of them, right? Even by nationality, British comedy. Apparently British comedy is something distinct. Kind of comedy that he was writing, we talked about this a little bit last time, was old comedy. It was very raw. It tended to take people from the actual city of Athens, sometimes other places too, and put them into these crazy situations, make fun of people. There was actually like a part of the play, like I told you about, where the actors would take off their masks, come down into the audience, and just start yelling at people. You are a terrible person because you did this. And everyone, wow, look at that guy getting it. So it's sort of like a roast at a certain point. You guys ever watch those Comedy Central roasts? Mm-hmm. Pretty, if you watch the uncensored ones, pretty, vicious stuff. But we get a kick out of that. And the ancient Greeks got a kick out of that too. Part of comedy is watching people trip over things and fall down, and provided it's not you or somebody you care about, it can be funny. So Aristophanes is part of that genre. Agathon is the new rising star of tragedy on the scene. And now what's really interesting is these guys don't actually provide you with a comedy or a tragedy within the symposium. It would be too long, right? You don't have time for character development or whole plot or acts or things like that. So what do? Eryximachus gives a physical explanation. You'd expect a doctor to do that, right? Go to a party and you say, "Yeah, I've been having these neck pains, and you think you could tell me something about it?" And the doctor says, "Well, it's because of this and this, bone in the neck is doing this thing to the nerve." They're giving you a physical explanation, right? And not Aristophanes, Eryximachus does this for all sorts of things, all across the board. We'll look at that in a moment. Aristophanes tells what we'd call a fable. Sometimes we talk about these sort of like folk stories, right? Grimm gathered together all sorts of folk stories that are kind of along these lines. Are they supposed to teach you something? Yeah, but they're also supposed to entertain. And you might not have been super entertained by Aristophanes' story reading it through, but it is pretty funny. And the way that he describes things is, kind of comic. And if you think through some of the implications, it gets more and more laughable. But it's also supposed to teach you something about human nature, about the way we are, that we're actually not what we think we are. So it's going beyond the appearances to the realities. Agathon doesn't give you a tragedy. There's no characters in it. It's all just about love. What he does instead is he gives you a really well-constructed rhetorical speech. Now, is anybody here going into communications? Few. What else would be doing this? I mean, law, political science. Anyone going into political science? Okay, so you want to pay attention to what's called rhetoric then. Rhetoric is the art of finding the meaning. This is the way Aristotle defined it. Rhetoric is the art to finding the means of persuasion, finding the ways to be able to get people to do things. And this doesn't just go for communications people or psychology or political science. Business people need to pay attention to this because persuasion is part of motivation. Aristotle actually says all education involves persuasion to some extent. You have to persuade the audience about what it is that you're trying to, inform them about, get them to believe it, and you have to actually get them to do their homework. He doesn't say that, but that's how I apply it. You have to get them to actually do the work that you want them to do, to change their thinking about things. Agathon puts together this really nice speech. It's an argument. He says, here's what we ought to do when we give speeches about this sort of thing. here's what I'm going to do, and here's the first part of my argument, here's the second part of my argument, and now I'm going to open up the floodgates and show off how flashy I can be at the very end after I've done the work, after I've done the, here's argument A, here's argument B, here's the points in favor of this. You probably didn't catch that reading it through, but that's the structure of it. Who did he learn to do this from? From one of the famous sophists, Gorgias, who hung out in Athens sometimes and actually did take money for teaching. He apparently made so much money that he was able to have a statue of himself made in his hometown out of gold. Life size. That's a lot of gold. So he really made a lot of money teaching this sort of thing. Does Agathon actually know what he's talking about when he's giving this great speech? What happens soon after that? Socrates starts asking some questions, right? So we'll hold off on that. Let's start out with this guy, Eryximachus. Oftentimes, Eryximachus is portrayed as if he's a real bore or a prude, you know? He's this guy who's at the party, and everybody else has got these great speeches about human beings and what the way they used to be or how great love is. And this guy wants to talk about the seasons and harmony and things like that and give this, well, if you understand the elements, seems kind of boring, like the person who shows up at the party on a Friday night and wants to talk shop about what they were studying in class that day, and everyone else is like, we had enough of that, right? But actually he's not. He's giving you some really interesting ideas to play with about the nature of love. And Eryximachus. I'm always forgetting how to write his name. So he's picking up from this guy Pausanias, who we looked at last class, right? What did Pausanias have to say about love? What do you remember from that?
Good and bad love.
Yeah, so that's a key thing right there. There's good love, and there's bad love. What else? Anything else that struck you? Yeah.
He said that good love was heavenly and bad love was earthly.
Very good. So Pausanias said that there's a fundamental difference between these. What else? What else do you remember about that distinction? Yeah.
Good love is like loving the soul, and bad love is like loving the body.
Yeah. Remember we talked about when people say platonic love, what they often have in mind is what Pausanias is talking about. Pausanias also made it about gender too, right? The good love is going to be between men and men because the Greeks had these kind of crazy notions about women. Socrates, by the way, is going to subvert this because who's the smartest person in the room by the end of the story? Diotima, right? Whereas the bad love could be between anybody whatsoever. Now Eryximachus is going to keep some of this. He's going to keep the good notion between good love and bad love. Is it going to be about what's heavenly and what's earthly? Is that going to be a distinction that he's going to make, though? No, because the earthly stuff can have good love, and the heavenly stuff, as it turns out, can have bad love, right? That's when the seasons don't work the way they're supposed to, and you get terrible storms. That's bad love up in the heavens. Is good love just about the soul, or is it also about the body for Eryximachus? Is bad love? Can bad love be in the soul? Yeah, they can have equal types of objects. So, what defines good and bad love then? Or good and bad? He also brings up this term, desires. Now, if you're a bit puzzled about that, when I ask you that question, there's good reason. He doesn't actually tell you. He invokes this idea but doesn't explain this idea. That's something you want to pay attention to when you're reading texts. Somebody might say, yeah, here's this great idea, but unless they actually unpack it for you and explain it, maybe it's not such a great idea. Maybe it's just something that they're saying, but it's not actually that informative. What he does seem to imply is that good love is some sort of harmony. Bad love is some sort of discord, right? So, think back to Pausanias' good love and bad love. Let's say that here's a classic situation, right? What happens when two guys are interested in the same girl or two girls are interested in the same guy? Do the two that are after the same object get along most of the time? What happens instead? Yeah, argument, discord. They have competing desires, competing motives. They can't both have the thing that they want. We don't even have to take romantic relationships. If all of us want the same candy bar, and we're not content to say there's 20 odd people in here, each of us is going to get a little tiny bit of candy. No, I want the candy bar for me, and maybe I'll share it with a few other people. And each one of you is thinking the same thing. We're not going to be, we're not going to be getting along, are we? We're going to be jarring with each other. We're going to be competing. Now that's desire, that's love, right? Love does make us do crazy things. Harmony is when everything comes together and fits together and nobody is compelled, everybody is able to get what they need out of it. Eryximachus is going to say, this doesn't just hold for romantic affairs or dividing up candy bars. This holds for the body itself. Not just our bodies, but the bodies of every living thing. Plants, animals, anything, I guess fungi. The Greeks didn't talk about that, but we have bacteria, other kingdoms. And does it just stop there? No, it also has to do with our soul. And it has to do with things like music. And it has to do with the entire cosmos itself. The entire world, considered as one big system, can be in harmony, or it can be all bollocksed up and fighting with itself and, sort of churning in and making all sorts of monsters and things like that. The sort of things that happen in Greek myth. Even the gods can be in harmony with each other or fighting with each other. And if you know your Greek mythology, did the Greek gods always get along?
No.
No, I mean, they're terrible. Zeus is always screwing around on his wife, the queen of the gods, mother of his 3 kids. Hades just, likes Persephone one day, so he steals her, and then her mother is so ticked off, she says, I'll let everything die. Till I get her back, everything's going to die. I mean, these are, I'm not going to say necessarily mean or cruel gods, but they're definitely not always thinking of the whole system, taking everybody into account. They're kind of selfish, aren't they? Hermes is actually a thief. He just likes stealing stuff. He actually steals from his brother Apollo for fun. The gods can sometimes have harmonious relationships, though, too. And human beings can be in harmony with the gods, in harmony with the divine, or out of harmony with it. So this entire thing is covered. What determines whether you're in harmony? So Eryximachus is going to talk in terms of elements. When I say that word, what occurs to you? What class comes to mind from high school?
Chemistry.
Chemistry, right. Because we think in terms of, I don't even know how many elements there are anymore, because every once in a while they find a new one. You guys remember, I'm sure it's different from when I was in high school than college, and then it's over 100, right?
They just found a new one.
There you go. So now they have to redo the chart, I suppose, again. How many are there? Do you know offhand? I think there's I remember at least 110 at one point. Anyway, that's a lot of elements. And what makes them elements? Why do we call them that? Why do they give you this big chart? You know, hydrogen, the helium, you know, all the way down to the rare earths and the ones where it's really interested in the radioactive ones. Yeah.
To help organize it and keep it in the system.
That's why we have a chart, yeah. What are we organizing? And don't just say the elements, because that's kind of circular. Right? What makes them elements? Yeah.
The structure.
Okay, yeah, that's true. We have atomic structure, and we know that even the atomic structure isn't the whole shebang, that each one of the particles is made up of other particles that we call quarks, and then by the time that you guys have grandkids, those grandkids will be, telling you about some other thing that they learned that's at an even deeper level, most likely. But the elements are the building blocks, so to speak. Obviously, they're not blocks, right? But they're the basic components of things. The Greeks, if they had a physical way of looking at things, they had this four-element, what we call physics or cosmology: air, earth, fire, water. This is kind of widespread throughout, the ancient world, and continued through the medieval period. Even in the early modern period, there were a lot of people still thinking in terms of these things. Do we now consider those elements? No, but they did. And you could also go one level deeper. What made Earth what it is? What gave it its qualities? Earth is cold and hard, solid, and dry. Thinking, right? Yeah. Sometimes you get these mixed up. Eryximachus is going to talk in terms of just a few of these qualities, like the hot and the cold, the wet and the dry. And notice he talks about some that are taste perceptions, the sweet and the bitter. Now, bad love is when these things actually jar with each other, when they don't get along, when the elements are out of accord with each other. Good love is when they can be brought into harmony with each other. Let's say we get away from elements like earth, air, fire, water, that sort of thing, and we think about parts of our body. How many of you are feeling particularly good today? Any of you? Just a few of you? How many of you feel sick? Any of you feel sick? Wow. There must be something going around. That's not good. Well, that means I'm probably going to get sick too. How many of you are sort of in between? Okay. So when you're sick, what's happening? Usually it's like something comes in from the outside and messes you up, right? Like an allergen. If you have allergies right now, something in the air is interacting with your sinuses or screwing up your histamine system. We have all these interesting explanations for these things. Some of you might be sick because you have a virus, or there's some bacteria within you that's messing you up. It's attacking your cells. And your body is actually engaging in reactions that you don't like the feeling of, like fever. When you get a fever, that's not the bacteria making that fever. That's your body saying, let's turn up the heat in here so we can cook these bacteria and hopefully not cook the rest of the body. But that would be sort of being out of sorts with yourself, right? And can't your body sometimes turn against itself? What are cases like that? Some of these diseases that come about, where the body itself is kind of breaking itself down. What comes to mind?
Cancer.
Cancer is a perfect example. Cells go crazy. Cells are supposed to reproduce, right? Because if they don't, we're screwed. We die. You don't have the same cells that you started with. You've shifted through a couple different sequences of them. Cancer, they just say, it's all I'm doing is reproducing. And I'm going to take all the resources from over there, and if I have to spill over into this space, that's just fine. That's what makes cancer cancer. Think about diabetes. Huge problem in this country. What's going wrong with diabetes? Why do you have to shoot yourself up if you have it? Yeah.
You're not making insulin.
Yeah, your body is no longer producing something that it ought to be doing. Some of the elements are out of discord. Some of the organs, we would probably say, right? They're not doing what they should be doing. They're doing something, but God knows what it is. And they're laying down on the job screws up things for everything else, and then those things get out of whack, and those cause other problems. And these used to just kill people before. I mean, it used to be if you had diabetes like 5 generations ago, you're dead. That's it. You're finished. You know, cancer, same thing. Nowadays, we can actually treat a lot of these things. And what is treatment for Eryximachus? It's reintroducing good love into the body. He talks about the doctor as being able to, here's sort of the listing of things. He can understand and distinguish the different loves and desires that work in the body. He can help encourage the good elements and discourage the bad elements. Determine which desires ought to be satisfied and how much. Here's a sort of prosaic example. Any of you ever had mono? A few of you? I had mono my freshman year of high school, and towards the very end of the freshman year. And I went, last track meet of the year, I ran and wasn't feeling well, and I collapsed after that. And so they took me to the doctor, and sure enough, you got mono. And when you got mono, at first you feel really bad, right? It's pretty horrible. And students sometimes here at Marist get it, and I feel bad for them. But then there's a dangerous period. You still have, your body is still full of the mono, but you feel good. And your doctor will tell you, you need to take it easy. Don't do any exercise. Don't exert yourself. No stress. You got to heal. And then, of course, you feel good, right? So what do you want to do after you have been sick for a while? What's the natural thing? I'm going to go out and enjoy myself. For me, it was like I'm going to start working out again. And my doctor told me straight up, you cannot work out. Because I asked him. I didn't listen to him. I started working out again. And then the next time I went to see the doctor and they took a blood culture, he said, now you're going to have to lay in bed all summer. All summer long. Can you imagine that? Because I didn't listen to him. Because he understood, according to Eryximachus, he understood what the actual good desires and bad desires of my body were. In this case, a bad desire was, hey, go back to your normal routine. The good desire, which I didn't have, was lay in bed. When you're 15 years old, do you want to lay in bed all day? I don't think so. I hope not. If you do, then you have to go to the doctor. What else? Root out the bad loves. And then in place good loves within us. That's what the medical art should be doing, according to Eryximachus. What about other arts? Think about music. We tend to look at music as, again, what? Consumer item? You all have your, all of you have smartphones, right? And on your smartphone you have an iPod of one form or another. I don't know, does Android just call it an MP3 player because they don't like the I thing, because Apple's the devil or something like that. So you have an MP3 player. How many MP3s, just off the top of your head, would you guess that you have? If I just ask you, how many do you think you have?
2.
No, not MP3 players, MP3s, MP3 files.
Oh.
How many songs?
Like 2,000.
2,000? What about?
Probably 1,000.
What about you? Either one of you. 700. That's kind of small. What about you? What's that?
900 probably.
Wow, you guys don't have a ton of music at this point. I have, just with 1980s heavy metal stuff, I have something like 6 days worth of music playing that I could play constantly. I forget how many thousand songs that is. But it gives you an idea about how much we just sort of, see music as something that we can manipulate. How many of you have played an instrument? And I don't mean here at Marist, but like in middle school or high school or elementary school, quite a few of you. So you remember what it's like to have to learn an instrument, and hopefully it wasn't all a chore, you actually had some joy in it at one point after you mastered it and could play with other people. How much of the time are you guys listening to music, do you think? Out of any given day? Do you listen to it when you drive in your car? Or do you listen to the news, or just turn it all off and enjoy sweet silence? Car noise. What about when you're studying? Do you listen to music when you're studying, or writing, or what else? Working out? You like music when you're working out? Going to sleep? Or is there some, no? Yeah. What else do we? Some places you can't get away from music. Driving, yeah. Maybe you listen to music several hours a day if you tally it up. Now, those people that are worried about music having effects on us, do you think they're just full of it, or does music actually have some sort of effects on us? Not necessarily the lyrics. That's what they always focus in on, you know. But think about the music itself, yeah.
Yeah, it would have an effect because sometimes whatever you're doing, you sometimes start doing something like you're cleaning, using that.
Yeah, that's a great example. You find yourself moving to the rhythm, whether you like it or not. Yeah.
Like if you're listening to a specific song that has maybe a happy beat or a sad beat, it'll affect your mood or how you perceive like an environment or people or things like that.
You're exactly right. And think about events. Why do we play music at events? Because it helps to produce the same sort of feeling across the crowd, and they kind of play off of each other. Mm-hmm. If you go to a concert or a club or something like that, and there's music playing but nobody's dancing at all, then you feel a little self-conscious dancing. If everybody else is doing it, then you get into the feeling of it, and it's kind of a group experience. So Eryximachus talks about music in terms of its elements and all that, but we ought to think about this in terms of music's effect on the soul as well. Can music itself, say, inculcate good and bad desires, or awaken them, or arouse them? What would the musician do? Would the practitioner of the art of music be somebody who could actually bring about certain effects? I mean, if you look at great producers, that's part of what they do. That's part of what they're attentive to. This track needs to be in here because it's going to have this kind of psychological effect. It's very difficult to articulate. We're not good at that sort of thing. Sort of like wine tasting. It's very difficult to say exactly what a wine tastes like, but we know that there is some sort of effect. For Eryximachus, it comes from these elements and whether we have harmony or disharmony. Finally, he gets to things like sacrifice and divination, and there we could be motivated by good or bad love. This gets kind of interesting. I'm going to skip over the seasons thing because we've already talked about that. Divination and sacrifice is a way for us to be interacting with the divine. Now, for the ancient Greeks, they have those gods like Apollo and Zeus and Poseidon and Athena. And, whether they really believed in them or not is kind of hazy. And, when you talk to somebody like Socrates, it gets really even further hazier because he's got some kind of strange notions about these guys himself. But they did engage in sacrifice. They did engage in divination. Interestingly enough, who else do the Greeks sort of classify as semi-divine? Parents. Very common thing in the ancient world for parenthood to be invested with a quasi-divine status. Why? Because you're bringing about new life. You're making a new being. And part of piety, what we call filial piety, was this proper behavior towards your parents. Sometimes it could get kind of twisted. Aristotle, for example, brings up a guy who dragged his father bodily, out by the hair, just as far as the threshold, and said, when somebody said, "Really, you shouldn't be beating your father," he said, "Well, he beat his father before, and his father beat the father before that, so I'm just continuing tradition. But they only went this far as the doorway, the threshold. So I'm well within proper limits." That's kind of a screwed up notion of filial piety. But it shows that the Greeks did have this sort of notion. Eryximachus thinks that these things can be understood in terms of good desires and bad desires. Now, it's not the doctor who's going to set you right with that sort of thing and implant the good desires and take out the bad desires. It's unclear who does that. But presumably there'd be somebody who does that. And this is what love really is about for Eryximachus. It's a process based on whether elements are synchronized with each other or out of accord with each other. There are some practitioners who can make it work. It's a very technological view on it, isn't it? Something that we can manipulate, something that we can work upon. But one other thing I want to say about Eryximachus very quickly. He gives you this impression that the role of the doctor and the role of the other people involved in this is to try to, promote this, but let us enjoy this a bit. Just like with food, right? Or drinking. Really, it's better for us if we don't drink at all and we eat healthy food. But, can you eat some unhealthy food? Yeah. And life would be less enjoyable if we didn't get to do some of this. But not too much, right? Eryximachus is the guy saying, don't drink too much. Have some, just not to excess. Could you apply this to other things? Let's think about sexual relationships now, and ones that are supposed to be committed. That would be a great example of something that's harmonious. You could picture Eryximachus saying something like, it's okay to cheat a little bit. Not go hog wild with this sort of thing, but maybe within certain limits, that's okay. Maybe that's going to be more enjoyable, more healthy. An example of this would be the 500-mile rule. You guys familiar with this? They made a movie, I think, about this sort of thing a while back. It wasn't called the 500-mile rule, but it came up where, like, if you're in a committed relationship, so long as you're within 500 miles of your boyfriend, girlfriend, spouse, you have to stay faithful. But if you're off further than 500 miles, then you can screw around. And then, they can do it too. And then you'll be a little bit happier when you come back. Now, does that sort of thing work? What do you think? What's your impression of that when I say something like that? You say, oh, that sounds pretty good. Or you say, that's probably playing with fire. Or I really wouldn't want my partner to do that. And just in the last year, my wife has been in Seattle. Where else? She has to go to San Antonio sometimes, I think. I don't want the 500-mile rule in place. Good reasons probably. Anyway, that's Eryximachus' speech. Let's look now at Aristophanes. And Aristophanes is like totally shifting gears. After he gets over his bout of hiccups that Eryximachus prescribed him a remedy for, Aristophanes tells you this crazy story about these people. There's a nose, eye, mouth, one neck. About these people, and they've got like, this is going to be a terrible drawing, but you've read the thing, so you know what we're talking about here, right? There's the original human being. They're smiling because they're so happy about their original condition. I put all those back. I don't need quite so many animals. There we go. That's better. They roll around. They're super powerful. What did I forget to put in, by the way?
Mouth.
No, you got a mouth right there. Okay. What's that?
Hands and feet.
Yeah, I suppose I should put hands and feet on there, but you're right. There's something else, though, that's really important to the story that I didn't leave on there. What's that?
A heart.
A heart? I guess. You'd have to have something to pump the blood. Yeah.
Gender differential?
What's that?
Gender differential?
Yeah, genitals. Reproductive organs. And we'd have to do a couple of these because some of them were male-male. They had, two sets of male apparatus here. Some had two sets of female parts. Some had one of each, right? And those are the androgynous ones, the hermaphrodites of ancient yore. And this is what we were originally. And because these beings were so strong, they started making trouble for the gods. And, there's always some sort of fly in the ointment, isn't there? And they actually tried to storm heaven. Now, that's sort of like dropping the nuclear bomb, trying to take the gods' abode away. That will, if anything, that will set the gods off. And they're like, well, we got to do something about these people because they are just causing so much trouble. But they're in a quandary, right? What do the gods want from human beings? Sacrifices. And this is a very literal idea. In the ancient world, you see this in culture after culture. The idea is you've got something like meat, and you take the best parts of the meat, and you burn them on the altar, and the smoke goes up to heaven, and the gods consume that, and they enjoy the smell and the taste. And then actually, the gods consume the spiritual essence of it, and then what happens to the meat after that? This is why people like doing sacrifices. Everyone else eats the meat, or the cereal offerings, or pick whatever else you got. It was one of the occasions in the ancient world where you actually did get to eat meat that was fairly regular. So people really got a big kick out of this, and the gods got a big kick out of it too, apparently. Not exactly sure how that worked, but Aristophanes kind of glosses over that. So they don't want to just kill these people off, with a great flood, or letting Zeus zap them all with lightning or fire, because then they won't have sacrifices. So they're in a real quandary. Well, Zeus says, here's a solution. Just cut them right down the middle. Cut them in half. And then we'll have to do a little bit of, reworking and stitching and stuff like that. So he gets the gods who are good at that sort of thing to come along. And they turn the head around. So, imagine this was actually the cut part. He doesn't say it, but they must have turned the legs and arms around in the story too, right? To face the right way. They turn the head around so it can look at this gaping hole, this wound in it. But they actually pull the skin tight and tie it up at the belly button. So that's, if you have an outie, as they say, yours is showing more. If it's pushed in, then, your little knot of your skin is hidden. And they left a few, wrinkles in the belly, and they smoothed out the chest and added a few features here and there. Now, what happened to the sexual organs? Well, those had to be moved around to the front as well, because the problem was these two halves of the original thing, they started to feel desire. And this is what the story is really about. Desire for what? What do these beings desire? Somebody takes something away from you that you really took for granted. Yeah. I mean, somebody burns your house down, you want your house back. Somebody steals your car, suddenly your car is on your mind. You're like, man, I really like that car. I want to have it back. Or even though it was a piece of crap car, I still want it back because it was mine. They want what they once had. They're missing half. And it's actually more for just their missing half. It's a desire for being complete, being whole again, being one thing. And so, these beings at the start, what happens is they seek each other out. The gods separate them out, put them in different places. And they seek each other out, and when they find each other, they just kind of hang out and they grab onto each other, because, how else would you come back together? And then they starve, and they die. And so the gods are not getting any sacrifices, because these human beings are now dying off. They're kind of useless that way. So they put the genitals around at the front so they can copulate and have some fun. And then after they do that, first off, if male and female come together, you get some more new beings, right? More sacrifices. But even if it's just other pairings, at least they'll have some fun, get their feeling satisfied to some extent. Then they can get back on with the business of making more sacrifices. or whatever else they're going to do. So, according to this idea, this is sort of a symbolic explanation of the way we are. Each one of us is looking for our missing half. Now, we could be satisfied with somebody else who does at least meet the criteria of some of our desires. And what are those desires? Well, this has to do with this notion that he's got originally of 3 sexes. These are the 3 possible combinations at the start. The ones who were originally male-male, when you separate them out, they want to be with a male. Specifically, they want to be with that male that was their missing half. But if they can't have them, or like their missing half dies, they can at least find another male to be with. That's where their attraction lies. Those who are female-female, same sort of situation, right? Split them down the middle. They want to find that missing half who is a female. And if she dies, well, they can find somebody else at least who's like her, who fits the bill. And those of us who, were in the middle with the weird mix kind of thing. Now, notice this is really interesting because we often think about in our society, this is the norm, right? And these are at extremes. And we're now like everything's on a level playing field, but culturally, no, that's not actually the case. Everybody who's one of these was originally half and half. These were all male. These were all female. These are the half and halves. They're looking for their missing half. And so if a man, his missing half dies, well, he can find another woman. If a woman, her missing half dies, she can find another man. Because that's where their attraction will be. That's where their desire will be. So this is really a story about sexual desire. But sexual desire is not what it appears to be. It's not just about getting off. It's not just about having fun. It's not just about all the different things that we experience when it comes to sex, or imagine, or write about, or talk about. It's about something deeper, a need that we can barely articulate for what's missing, what we've left, what's been taken away from us. The only thing that will make us truly happy, according to this, is to be reunited with our missing pair. And even that is not going to fully cut it, right? Why not? So you find your missing half, sparks fly between you, you have what's called chemistry, you go out on some dates, you start sleeping together, that's a lot of fun, now you're very close and intimate. Turns out you have the same taste in music, you like the same movies, you go hiking together, now you start, move in together, or at least put some of their stuff at your place, or vice versa. Why isn't that enough? What about if you get married? Wouldn't that seal the deal? Tie the knot? Well, that's often how we think of it, right? Marriage is going to it's all going to be easy street from now on. Yeah?
You'll never fully be put back together.
Exactly. What we really want is to not just spend time with the other person, or have things in common, or have sex with them, or be romantic with them, or pick whatever you want, or even do nice things for them. We want to be the same being with them. We want to be fused together. He says if Hephaestus, the god who did all this kind of stuff, the god of Smiths, so I suppose we'd say the god of technology, were to show up and say, do you think you'd like for me to take you to and weld you into one being? They'd be like, that was it. That's what we wanted. That's what we've been seeking out. So all of our other desires, all of our other ways of loving are just sort of shadows of something that's, for us, unattainable. Something very interesting to think about. In a way, it's not really a comic story in the end, is it? It's almost a tragic story. We can never truly have what we want. So that's Aristophanes' shtick. Let's talk about this guy Agathon Now, Agathon is this young orator, like I said, a rising star. It's his party. He just won the competition. And it's interesting because Socrates starts out, talking with him, and he's like, yeah, you're going to do just fine. I'm worried about my speech. But Agathon, you're going to be fine. Didn't you just, blow them away yesterday? And Agathon's like, it's a whole different thing. Delivering a tragedy to a whole crowd of people. It's a very, it's much more difficult, much more anxiety-provoking to talk to people who actually know what they're talking about. Isn't that the case? If you ask performers, they will tell you that is the case. They can get up on a stage and do what it is that they're going to do, but you put them in the interview room one-on-one with a tough interviewer, they don't like that. Because, they might crack, and actors need lines, things like that. Agathon says, that's my real worry, and that's actually going to turn out to be the case. So this great speech that he gives is going to turn out to be ultimately wrong. But let's look at the speech anyway. So he says, I'm not going to write this on the board. He says, all of the rest of you have been claiming to do what we set out to do, which is what? To praise love. But really you haven't been doing that. You've been praising the God's gifts to human beings. You haven't been telling us what love really is and why love is so good. Now, is that a fair charge? You think it is? They haven't said anything about the nature of love? Pausanias did, didn't he? Phaedrus did. And it seems like Eryximachus did. They may have had different conceptions of it, but they had some conceptions of what love was, didn't they? So he's starting off on kind of a bad footing, but it seems plausible. That's really the key to his speech. It seems plausible until you start poking at it. The way it's constructed is actually very good. He says, love is great for two reasons. Love is beautiful, or they use the word fine in the translation that you have. The Greeks had this term kalon that covers the beautiful, the honorable, the fine, the aesthetically pleasing. Love is good. Agathon. Now notice, his very name means good in Greek. Love is to agathon, the good, the thing that is good, the thing that has goodness as its attribute. And he's going to say love is beautiful and love is good because, point 1, point 2, point 3, point 4, love is good because of these things. And what is he actually going to provide us with? Love is young. Love is tender. Love is supple. And love is, has a nice complexion. That's sort of an afterthought, isn't it? I met this person yesterday, and boy, was she beautiful. She was young. She was, very soft skin. She was so graceful. Plus, she had a nice complexion. That somehow seems to be, not quite up to the standards. But the way he talks about it in terms of flowers is nice. Over here, love is good. He talks in terms of the virtues. Virtues are ways of being good for the Greeks. And he talks about justice, temperance, courage, and wisdom. So if God has all these things, God is really the best. Now let's look at the actual arguments. Does love actually have these characteristics? So he says, love is the youngest of the gods and flees from age. So how do you know that love is young? Because we don't like old people. Old people don't make us feel attractive. Younger people do. This is particularly interesting in our culture, which is obsessed with youth, isn't it? It's funny to see all the baby boomers right now, people who are retiring, your grandparents' generation, striving so hard to try to appear youthful, to try to stay in shape, to keep themselves regular with Activia, and yet, somehow not appear unsexy as a result. So they're really trying hard. You got to give it to them. And they were the first youth generation in America. They were the first ones to be really, really centered on that and think that they were somehow more in touch with the essence of things. So maybe there is something to this, notion of love being youthful. The other thing that he says is love couldn't have been around very long, because if love had been, the gods wouldn't have done these horrible things that we know they do in Greek mythology to each other, because those are done from necessity. What about tenderness? He compares love to another god, and that god's name is Ate, and Ate means destruction. And destruction, Homer tells us, walks on the heads of men. Now, heads are kind of hard, right? Because they have skulls in them. What is softer than a head? Your heart. Human hearts, right? Hearts and souls are the softest thing altogether. And that's where love resides, isn't it? In the human heart. So therefore, love must be tender or soft. Flexibility, suppleness, gracefulness. This is an interesting one. This is not a bad argument. Love can enfold all things. Love can make its way in secretly to the human heart. Have you ever been surprised by your attraction to somebody? You didn't know that you had it until suddenly it's there? Well, that would be love sneaking into your heart, wouldn't it? And then love abounds where there's flowers. Flowers smell nice and look nice, so love is kind of like that. Not a particularly good argument, but a nice image, isn't it? Sort of Valentine-y. So, what do you think? Are these good arguments for love being superlatively beautiful? They're plausible, right? Let's see where he's going to go. So, what about these virtues? I want to say love is actually good. What does it mean for the Greeks to be good? To have these characteristics. Justice means fairness. Not making other people do things they don't want to do. Being right in your dealings with other people. Does love do this? Love doesn't make anybody do anything they don't want to do. Bless you. Everything they do is voluntary. There's no compulsion with love. Can you force love? Can you make somebody love you? I don't mean like, weird serial killer, brainwashing in the basement kind of stuff. We just watched a Dexter last night. That's why I've got that on my mind. Weird stuff going on in there. With chairs and things. Can you force love? No, you can't, right? You can't even buy love with money. You can buy sex, but you can't buy love. Love has to be kind of earned or cajoled or a response to love. So love can't do or suffer injustice. So love must be totally just. Love itself is justice. Temperance. This is a word that we're not used to using. We would say moderation instead. Temperance, we tend to think about drinking alcohol, right? But your bodily pleasures that you indulge in, sleep, sex, food, drink, what else do we like that you could be temperate about? Speed, like people driving too fast on the road because they like the feel of power that comes with that. Those could all be matters of temperance. Is love temperate? Well, let's think about what temperance does. Temperance controls our desires and pleasures. Doesn't love control our desires? So love is temperance. Love is temperance itself. Courage. Now here he relies on a what we call sort of an a fortiori type of argument, meaning, well, if you buy this, then this even more. So he talks about the god of war. Do you guys remember? Do you guys know this story? Love conquers the god of war. Does anybody know this story offhand? Let me give it to you real quick because we're almost out of time. So love, the feeling of love conquers Ares, the god of war. He gets in bed with Aphrodite, the goddess of love. Now the problem is Aphrodite is married to Hephaestus. And Hephaestus, finding out that he's being cuckolded, that means being cheated on, he doesn't like this. So he makes this net that comes down over the lovers. And this is before cameras, right? And gotcha shows. So he strings them up in this net, and then he brings all the other gods, and he's like, look at this. See what she's doing? See what he's doing? I think there should be some sort of penalty here. So love was able to conquer Ares, the god of war. And the god of war is the most courageous, right? So if you can conquer the god of war, you must be even more courageous than the god of war. You're totally courageous. So that's love. Wisdom. Well, love is a poet and the source of poetry in others. He's creative of the animals. He inspired all the arts, so he must be supremely wise. Now, when you start looking at these arguments, and I invite you to reconsider them, they're not actually very good arguments. There's holes in them that you can find. Plato wants you to find those holes. That's part of why he set up the dialogue the way he did. At first, they sound quite good. And Agathon is going to bring this to a close by going into this long speech, this paragraph, right, about all the things that love does. And it is like the finest oratory that you can put on tap. It's sort of like listening to somebody like Martin Luther King, who was a great orator himself, just get up and everything follows from everything else. Every single word is perfectly chosen. But you have to ask yourself, is this all just sort of glitz? Or does it mean anything? That's where we're going to pick up next time. Yeah.
Just a general question.
Sure.
Why did Socrates stay alive for so long? Because he didn't really have a job.
Oh, that's a good question. Well, he was what we would call independently wealthy. Back then it didn't take quite so much to be independently wealthy because taxes were not what they are for us, and you didn't have quite so many necessities, and people lived quite a bit closer to the land. Socrates, well, let me back up a little bit. So Athens, you guys know Athens was a slave society, right? Most ancient societies throughout the world, as a matter of fact, every culture that managed to get to a certain level of development had slavery, servitude of some sort. So there was this underclass of people who were doing work, right? That meant that you could have a larger amount of the free population sort of living off of their work. Socrates, he would have inherited some wealth, and then he could have, a lot of people, they inherit wealth, they do something with it, they add to it. What Socrates chose to do instead is wander around the city, getting into conversations with people, and he saw this as a good thing. He saw this as taking care of his soul and trying to urge his fellow citizens to take care of their souls. So he wasn't just doing nothing, sitting around and playing games all day. But it was not remunerative work. Nobody. As a matter of fact, he made an issue of the fact that he didn't take money for teaching, and that's something you can do when you're fairly wealthy. You can afford to do that. That's a good question. So